Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to this special edition of Issues Watch Live. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the short and long-term effects of the coronavirus pandemic on both the New Jersey and the national economies. While there's been a tremendous amount said about the current economic situation, I haven't really seen that much about what impact the pandemic may have on the economy over the long term. When it comes to the financial impact, almost all the press attention has been, rightfully so, on what is being done right now to provide economic relief to individuals and businesses. So for quite a while, I've felt that there's a real need to look at the longer term impact. And apparently our members agree. This is the largest Issues Watch registration we've ever had. So now that the economy is slowly reopening, CPAs and others want to have a sense of what the post-pandemic environment may look like. So today I'm honored to be joined by two prominent economists. We have Daniel Bachman, an economist with the national accounting firm Deloitte, where he is responsible for their quarterly U.S. economic forecast, and he's also a member of the Wall Street Journal's Economic Forecasting Survey panel. Danny will be our expert addressing the national economy. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you.
Our second guest, Jim Hughes, is an expert on the New Jersey economy. In 2017, he was named to the prestigious position of university professor at Rutgers University. Prior to that, he was the dean of the Rutgers Edward Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy for 22 years. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get started. Before we talk about where the economy may be headed, let's take a few minutes to look back and talk about what's transpired over the past 10 weeks or so. Danny, can you give us a rough picture of where the national economy was before the coronavirus crisis shut down businesses, I guess in mid-March, and where it is now?
Sure. So, and it's a little depressing in a way to think that it was only in February and early March I was giving presentations and talking about the fact that we were basically at or close to full employment. The economy was likely to grow at potential over the next few years, which we had estimated at 1.5% to 2%. And I was talking about some of the long-term issues that presented, but in the shorter term, there were a lot of good things going on in the economy. We had demand for lower skilled workers was really picking up, and so we were seeing wages pick up in that area. So generally speaking, the economy looked like it was pretty healthy. And then what we had to do was just stop things. So we shut down a large share of the economy. We're estimating that over the first 2 quarters, GDP will have fallen at close to 20% from its 2019 Q1 level. So that's a lot of the economy to just shut down. And we did that deliberately, or we tried to do it deliberately anyway. I like to say that this is one case where we're paying people unemployment insurance so they don't work. We don't want them to go to work because that's how we reduce the spread of the disease. Of course, putting brakes on the economy like that is a problem, and we'll talk about where that's going to go. But that's where we were, a healthy economy, and then we just shut it down.
So Jim, what's the story been here in New Jersey? What was it like 10 weeks ago? And now I'm assuming pretty similar to what Danny said, but I really don't know that. So how would you describe it?
Well, my experience is very similar to Dan's, giving presentations in early March. And people would ask, how long is the expansion going to go? So I'd always raise the experience of the wonder down under. That's Australia. Australia hadn't had a recession since 1991, over 28 years ago.
I'm going to move there, but
That's
I'm
now
sorry.
in jeopardy given the situation the past quarter or so. But New Jersey's economy was doing extraordinarily well. And February 2020 marked the 120th month of job growth in New Jersey. So for a full 10 years, from February 2010 to February 2020, the economy was adding jobs pretty steadily. And over that period, we added 400,000 jobs, a net gain of 400,000 jobs over 10 years. Then March and April hit us like nothing before. We then lost 800,000 jobs in 2 months. So that 800,000 in 2 months is double the 400,000 we had gained over 10 years. So as of April, which is the last month for which we have data for the state, we are now back to the employment level in New Jersey of 1985, 35 years ago. So this is a setback of all setbacks with the state. So we've tentatively, I don't know what Dan calls it, but we've tentatively called this downturn the Great Contraction, and it's one of the trilogy. We had the Great Depression, then the Great Recession, and now we have the Great Contraction. And this stands between the two of them there, and hopefully we don't match the Great Depression by the time is over. And then I think both in the nation and New Jersey, April was like the worst month in history. And we started joking around that to badly paraphrase Franklin D. Roosevelt, April 2020, a month that will live in infamy. We haven't had a month's job loss like that ever. For New Jersey, for example, we lost 758,000 jobs in April. The previous worst month was in September of 1945 when we shut down the arsenal of democracy in our war production. That was about 90,000. So that was the previous record. The new record is 708,000. So, we're in deep doo-doo.
So now let's bring out the economist's crystal ball and look forward. Danny, can you tell us where you think, and I know this is difficult and really is just looking at a crystal ball, but can you tell us where you think the economy will be in 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years? And when might we get back to the point where things are more normal, where, let's say, the economy is growing at a moderate rate and unemployment is under 5%? What does the crystal ball tell you?
Well, actually, I have a crystal ball back here. Here you go. So if you do this long enough, you win a forecasting contest occasionally.
Okay.
That's where I got that one from. But more seriously, when I do forecasts, I don't do a single forecast because I tell people that if I do that, I'll be wrong. But it's better to understand possibilities than to think in terms of sort of a point. Where will the economy be? We're releasing in the next couple of weeks a new forecast where we'll have 3 scenarios. And the scenarios will give you a picture of where we think the economy might be. And we follow the infamous letters that people have been talking about. So we have a 5% chance of a V-shaped recovery. That is fairly fast, starting in the 3rd quarter of this year, getting back to 2019 Q1 GDP in about at the end of 2022. So it takes some time to get back there. One of the problems that we have, I think, is that there are some economists who think that we're going to be able to turn the economy back on, which we can't, and I'll explain why in a minute. Our baseline scenario with a 70% probability is a U-shaped recovery, in which we get back to the 2019 Q4 GDP at the end of 2023. And in that one, we basically have we're facing several quarters of low growth. We'll probably get decent growth in the 3rd quarter, but then growth will peter out or even be negative. And then our 3rd scenario which we call no end in sight, because that's what it is, involves the economy never over our 5-year horizon getting back to the previous level. And what drives these are epidemiological forecasts. This is one case where, as an economic forecaster, I can blame someone else.
Wow, that's good.
Namely the epidemiologist. But seriously, we have the question that drives this is, what is going to happen to the disease? And so our forecasts are based on 3 probabilities. The probability number 1, which you see as low probability, is that somehow it just goes away. It stops being a problem. And so we have growth picking up fairly quickly. We don't think that's that likely, and epidemiologists don't think it's that likely. So then the question is, okay, so if we're talking about a vaccine, let's say, how long does it really take to get a vaccine? Well, you know, we're talking about best case, the vaccine will be sort of available, or we'll start to have something we can think about in early 2021. It still has to be deployed. And vaccines, by the way, are not easy to develop. About 95% of attempts to develop vaccines fail, I understand. Now my Deloitte colleagues in health sciences say this is a little different because we're throwing a lot of money at it. But the vaccine might be less probable than you think. Then it has to be deployed. So we think that best case, either vaccine and or treatment, gives us the ability to really start growing in the second half of 2021. That's the U-shape. And then there is the possibility that we never get a vaccine and we never really get a handle on the disease itself. And what we have then are rolling shutdowns. And this is a real possibility we need to think about. So what we have are, let's say we start schools, and schools are a huge problem here. So we start schools, and then your kids go to school, and every few months they end up spending 2 weeks at home because someone at the school has the disease. And everyone has to self-quarantine, school stops, business stops if you're in a business, and so on. So that's the no end in sight scenario, and it's very dismal. I joke about being a dismal scientist, but realistically, this is a possibility to think about.
Wow, I am depressed, but I'm glad you told us the truth. And did you say the scenario, the worst case scenario is what are the percent of?
That's 25% we've given it. Okay. These are extremely scientific probabilities. We get our economics team together, which is only a few people, but we get together and we argue about them until we come up with a consensus.
Right. And the best case scenario was what
5%?
5%. Okay. Well, and I didn't even think that scenario was as good as I would have liked it to have been. But all right, I don't get to choose what I want. So Jim, what about New Jersey? How do you see things, recovery-wise, or where will we be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years?
Well, we're not as precise as Dan. And at the state level, we're really more dependent on the monthly job data and the like, because GDP data comes in much later. And then there's a lot of revisions on the state level and the like. So it's really difficult to track the economy. But sort of the number to give you an idea of what we're facing and what it would take to get back to, let's say, the new normal, or perhaps it's the new abnormal that we're going to be confronting. We're down 800,000 jobs right now, a little bit more than that in those 2 months. During the past 10 years, our job growth was 40,000 per year. So if we divide 40,000 into 800,000, it would take us 20 years to get back to the employment level of where it was in February. That's a little bit harsh, I think. We're going to have a sharper employment bounce back at some point. But a second one is the best job growth years in the history of New Jersey. We've only had 2 or 3 where we've added roughly 100,000 jobs per year. So if we could return to that extraordinarily robust 100,000 jobs per year, it would take us 8 years going forward to get back to where we were. So just those simple numbers indicate, the situation that we will confront. Now, a lot of the layoffs were temporary in those 800,000, and they really focused on the hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, retail trade, and the like. And they were deliberately shut down. As the shutdown rules start easing up, hopefully we'll get a lot of those recovered relatively quickly. But the other fear that I have and my colleagues have, right now, these were mainly blue-collar workers. They weren't the elite white-collar workers, the tech workers that were impacted. They were able to work at home. But will we have a second wave of downsizings as companies realize their fiscal position and financial position has been weakened dramatically? So while that one sector goes back, the hospitality type jobs are recovered. Are we going to have permanent reshaping of our professional and business services sector, our information sector, our high-tech sector, and the like? So that's going to, that question, I think, we'll find out in the next 2 monthly job reports. And the timing on this session was not that fortunate, because tomorrow morning at 8:30, we'll get the May data for the US, which may add a little bit of clarity to the situation. But I think in the short term, the good news is going to be, yes, things are getting worse, but they're getting worse at a slower pace.
Well, that's very good to know. So now this next question is kind of depressing, but why not? It's a depressing topic. Danny, do you have any idea of what percentage of businesses across the nation have already gone out of business? And what percentage do you see failing over the next 12 months?
So I don't have data on this. There's some the data that we normally use would be very lagged. And there's some very clever attempts to use credit card data to guess this, but what you'll get are businesses that have stopped operating, not that have gone out of business completely. Right. And that's actually an issue, because there are a lot of businesses that are suspended right now that may or may not survive. The key here, though, is that the economy is probably going to look different in the future, particularly in a future in which we don't have the ability to somehow wipe the disease away, like a vaccine. So, the nature of businesses are going to change, and that's going to require business shutdowns, maybe fewer restaurants, for example, fewer entertainment venues, that sort of thing, because we know those are the areas that are particularly problematic when it comes to disease spread. So what we would see in the long run is changes in what people spend their money on, and that resulting in probably quite a number of businesses going out of business and new businesses coming in the areas that people do want to spend money on. As I like to say, bass boats. You can't get more socially distanced recreation than fishing. So rather than go to Broadway, maybe you'll go fishing, and you'll buy a bass boat instead of those expensive Broadway tickets. I mean, that's just a guess, but it gives you an idea of some of the kinds of things that could change over time.
Right. Okay. Jim, same question. Any idea of how many or what percentage of New Jersey businesses have already failed or probably will fail within a year?
Well, my highly learned, deeply researched position is I don't have a clue. The data is really lacking.
Right.
We're going to have to wait several months to actually get some kind of a track record just to see our restaurants going to reopen? Will they
Right.
be able to operate successfully at 25% density, 35% density that the new rules will require? So we've got a big learning curve to ascend there.
Right. Right.
The other dimension, I think, is structural change, to major sectors of the economy. We know the office industry is being subject to substantial distress right now. I mean, a key question is, we know the distress that was caused to bricks and mortar retailing by e-commerce. Will the pandemic cause equivalent stress within our office markets and the like? And for New Jersey, it could be a mixed bag. And one of at least my colleagues in the office industry have indicated, all of a sudden they've been getting a lot of inquiries from New York companies that are looking for space in New Jersey, but not for a 5 or 7 year lease, but for a 1 or 2 year lease. And they're thinking either of establishing temporary outposts or even permanent outposts, but they're testing the waters right now to see how their employees are going to react to that. Because we have about 400,000 New Jerseyans that work in New York City, and they depend on public transportation to get across the Hudson River. And so public transportation is going to be an issue. And, New Jersey is the poster child for obsolete suburban office buildings. That was our core competence in the 80s and the 90s. Now it's the lagging sector nationally and globally and the like. But this could give a little bounce to New Jersey's office markets if there's new ways of doing work, people having the choice to, let's say, work at home 1 or 2 days a week, maybe go in once a week to the major headquarters in New York, but then have a lot of meetings in the New Jersey sub-office sector and the like. And all that's going to take a year or two, I think, to work itself out to see what the new office ecosystem is going to look like.
Interesting. We have a question from a member, and I'm sure they're talking about, Danny, what you were saying before. And that question is, did you say that 25% chance of no recovery in 5 years?
Of not reaching 2019 Q4 GDP.
Okay. Okay.
That's how we set it up.
Okay. So it's a recovery compared to now.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. All right. Thank you. So let's look at unemployment. The unemployment rate is astounding. The last time I looked, it was about 15%, both nationally and in New Jersey. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Do you see Danny, any significant drop in these numbers by, let's say, mid-fall?
I'm not expecting that. And the thing we're looking for, and I think Jim mentioned this, was that second round. So we've seen a lot of the drop in employment has been in 2 industries: arts, recreation, and arts and recreation services, and accommodation and food services. So the question is whether we get more rounds as the multiplier effect starts hitting other parts of the economy.
More rounds of
layoffs.
Oh, okay.
So we have a lot of people laid off. Now we've filled in a lot of their income. So personal income actually didn't fall in April,
Right.
which was a big positive, and it didn't fall because the federal government gave people lots of money.
Right.
But at some point they're not going to have incomes, and if they don't have incomes, they won't be spending, and that will have an effect. And businesses now are beginning to think about planning and about what that means for them. So, if you tell me that we take 20% of households and cut their incomes by a lot, spending is going to go down. I'm going to tell you GDP is going to fall by more than the amount that they're spending. So given that I don't think in any event that we're going to have a temporary rebound in the third quarter, but we will continue to have slow growth in the fourth quarter and the beginning of 2021, I don't think the unemployment rate is going to be much lower by, say, January, February 2021 than it is now.
Wow, that's a lot of unemployment. Jim, how about here in New Jersey? Similar?
I think pretty similar. And the issue is what were originally thought of as temporary layoffs, furloughs, and the like. What proportion of those will become permanent layoffs? Will alternative job opportunities replace some of those areas that have experienced the most significant downturns and the like? But it's, I mean, it is so uncertain that to make definitive statements there, I think, are really, really difficult. But
Right.
the high levels of unemployment are going to stay around for a while. We haven't even seen what the public sector, I mean, about 90% of the job losses, 95% of the job losses have been in the private sector, very few in the public sector, but the public sector is about 17 or 18% of the job base. And just looking at some of the fiscal conditions at higher education in New Jersey, at other levels of government, unless there's some massive infusion of federal aid, we're going to have a shrinkage of substantial volumes in the public sector that are going to add to the woes that that the private sector is now experiencing.
Oh, it all doesn't sound very uplifting. I'm not going to go home and celebrate today. So here's another question from one of our members. And actually, I see that they stole this question from something I was going to ask later, but here it is. Do you anticipate that there will be, I guess, Danny, I'll throw this over to you. Do you anticipate that there will be a stimulus package to bail out state and local governments?
Of course, you're asking me to predict politics.
Right.
I have enough trouble with economics, but actually I think that this is something that's very likely. The question is more when. And it's
Right.
also possible we'll see a couple of tranches of it depending on the election. The fact is that this is a huge hit to state and local governments. It has nothing to do, the hit has nothing to do with the behavior of state and local governments. And it does make sense to have that subsidy come in. It may take the actual experience of trying to restart schools in the fall under these conditions with less money for some federal policymakers to realize that this is a universal problem among all states and that the federal government does have the key to solution. So it may take a while for this to happen, but I think that the logic of it is pretty strong. The federal government's in a position to borrow and obtain the money that it needs. Thus, we need to keep schools running. We need to keep essential services running. And so logically, we would do it, I would think.
Are they still, is the holdup on the aid to states and municipalities, is it still where the House wants to do it and the Senate is saying, sure, we'll do it, but only if liability protections are passed? Or is that an old argument?
It's a little more complex than that. One of the problems is that different states did vary and have varied in their funding of their pension plans.
Yeah, okay.
And I think you know about this in New Jersey, right?
So, no, I never heard of it.
Yeah, no one's ever worried about funding pension plans in New Jersey, which is the problem. So, well, look, you're not in Illinois. You can just think about that. So some members of Congress are concerned that that a bailout of states would be a bailout of these bad pension decisions.
Right.
And they would prefer that states make other decisions. I'm not quite sure what, because the logical decision for a state like Illinois to make is actually to stiff the bondholders. And if there were bankruptcy for states, that's what would happen. Local governments do precisely that. You just, you have a choice between bondholders or keeping the schools open. The bondholders lose. But states don't have bankruptcy, so there's a lot of question about what will happen there. And so that's kind of in the background. And the liability protection is a secondary issue that I think has been used somewhat, although it's a significant issue in itself. Again, so, you have these arguments over things that people have been arguing about for years. And sometimes you have to shove something in the face of these people and say, stop arguing about what mattered last year. If we want to have schools reopen in your state, you're going to have to, as a senator, you're going to have to vote for some method of financing that. Okay. So that's why I think it's a question of when.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know New Jersey could use the money. Let's talk about the various sectors of the economy. Have there been any sectors, well, Danny, we'll start with you on a national level, but have there been any sectors that haven't been affected at all? And of those that have been affected, which do you think will take the longest to recover or might not survive at all?
So I'll keep this short because I think it's an interesting question for New Jersey in particular. But at the national level, one private industry that didn't lose a lot of employment was utilities.
Everybody still needs their lights, right?
So you have some industries like that, obviously, that and more generally, the grocery business, for example, has done well. Now they have extra costs and they've had supply chain issues, but generally speaking, they are sitting in a fairly good situation. Obviously, the industries that are really, really problematic are arts, entertainment, and recreation, and accommodation and food services, because those are the industries that, absent a wiping away the disease, you're sitting there wondering how things are going to happen. So this is, from an industry point of view, it's really a question of the extent to which employees and also customers are put in situations in which they might spread the disease.
Got it. Jim, what's been happening in New Jersey? Who's been hit hardest? Who's doing okay? Who's actually maybe doing well?
Well, there hasn't been one sector that experienced growth during the last 2 months. Every single sector has been negatively impacted. And at the state level, we have a little bit of difficulty with drilling down into the economic super sectors or industrial super sectors to get to some specific industries and the like. So we got rough data. And one of the annoying ones is one of the subsectors of, it's a big trade, transportation, and utilities, but they mix transportation, warehousing, and utilities in one grouping there. And you can't figure out which one is which, except with seasonally unadjusted data and the like. Now, we know transportation and warehousing, those are fulfillment centers and the like, and those are going to do well. I mean, New Jersey is the third largest warehouse distribution center in the country and the like, following Chicago and Los Angeles, Long Beach and the like. So that's going to do well. It has done well. Amazon has been hiring and the like. And utilities is a strange group because you've got telecommunications, which has been shrinking in the state now for really over a decade. And as copper landlines start decreasing and the like, so Verizon New Jersey is having they're shrinking in terms of their head count, but Verizon Wireless may be growing and the like. We got a little data problems there. But another broad category is professional and business services. And that ranges from legal services technology, engineering services, architectural services. That's the big category that's central to office buildings in the state. And the high end of that, professional technical, their rate of decline is only about a third of what the overall decline is. And the big grouping there, again, is the lower ending. And I don't know why they labeled it this way, but it's administrative support and waste management and remediation services and the like. So what is all this waste management? It's basically, these are the filing cabinet people, the old typing people, and the like. The low that bore the brunt. That contracted as equal to some of the worst sectors going on. But again, will it spread to the professional and technical category and the like? But there's really, in those big, large sectors, everybody's been hurt.
Okay, this next question is, I'm actually going to take my question, which links pretty well to a question we just got in from one of our members. So my question was, there's been a big emphasis on helping small businesses and a lot of press coverage on their struggle. But what about, big business? What about the S&P 500, for example? I was actually told by a wealth manager yesterday that by and large, the impact on them has been very minimal. So that was my question. And then let me throw in a related question that just came in from one of our members. And that is, the stock market continues to have improved and stronger performance, which runs counter to the economic news we're hearing. What is driving this? Where is the disconnect? So I'll throw that over to you, Danny.
Yeah, okay, I'll start with the stock market question because that's the easier one to answer, in my view, which is my opinion is in fact one of the more pessimistic in the profession. So you should know that.
Okay.
And in fact, many of the Wall Street forecasters are predicting a very strong V-shaped recovery. I'll have to tell you, I don't understand what they're thinking given the epidemiology behind what's going on. But that is what they're thinking, and I think that has gotten into the stock market, and hence the stock market is pretty optimistic. I think that, I have to say, this is one case where we have this thing called efficient markets hypothesis, that the markets take in all information and they're all knowing and know what they're doing. And I do wonder at this point, because I'm seeing that. I'm seeing these forecasts that seem to me to be overly optimistic, and logically they'd be driving the stock market. As far as the impact on the S&P companies, some of them have been hit pretty hard. Depends on what they do, right? Ask any airline whether they've been affected. Now, it's not quite true that there's no aid for large corporations. It's not PPP, it's actually the Fed being willing to purchase bonds. Mm. So it's a bit more hidden. You have to know more of the inside baseball. And it doesn't get the same headlines because, of course, small business employment is what drives the political stuff that drives the headlines. Whereas the Fed, making sure that bond markets are working and being willing to buy corporate bonds, which they do. If you go to the Fed website and look at the number of facilities, they call them, in which they're willing to go and buy different types of assets, it's gotten absolutely incredible. There are something like 14 of them. So they're trying to keep financial markets going. One of the ways they're doing that is by making sure that large corporations have access to lending. Large corporations are still going to face the same long-run problems, which is if you're in a business which is going to shrink or that's sensitive to COVID, you are going to shrink, and you're going to have to figure out what to do with it, and your costs will go up. If you're in a business that could be construed as being an alternative, making bass boats, then you might actually do pretty well. And one of the reasons, by the way, that the index is probably doing well is, of course, some of it is driven by the big um, uh, communications or companies, the Facebook, Amazon, Google, they've all been doing quite well. Anyone that does, virtual stuff is in a good position, and they actually are an important part of the S&P right now. So, so you do have companies that are doing well, but it's very, very dependent on what industry you're in.
Right, right. So how have the big corporations been doing here in New Jersey, Jim?
Well, let me turn to the stock market for a second. Somebody much smarter than me once said, the stock market has forecast fully nine of our last 5 recessions. So on the downside, the stock market has not been very good. So I assume it's the same situation as on the upside. They've probably in the past have predicted 10 of the last 4 up cycles that we've been in. I think what we're going to be seeing, or an issue I see, is that many companies, particularly the past 5 years, have taken an enormously long time to build up their highly skilled workforce, the next gen millennial workforce and the like. And I think the first thought a month ago was that, boy, we have to keep that workforce. We can't let them go to our competitors. We'll do whatever it takes to keep them and the like. But going forward, the realization may take hold that, hey, we have to cut costs someplace. Revenues may be down. Our office space costs may be going up significantly if we have to reconfigure all the office space for health reasons, if we have to de-densify, provide a lot more space per worker and the like, or have to have multiple locations and the like. So they're going to be hit with costs on one side, declining revenues on the other, and that could precipitate something that they never anticipated, was having to let really skilled workforces contract.
Oh, more good news. Danny, what do you see as and I'm sure you've probably been asked this numerous times, what do you see as the similarities and differences between this situation we're going through now and the Great Recession?
So this is completely different. As opposed to the Great Recession, when the Great Recession started, or when we started getting into it, particularly after Lehman Brothers failed, I realized I had to bone up on my knowledge of financial crises. So I started reading books about the 1929 crash and Great Depression. And in those days, I would put them up on Facebook, and my daughter saw them and said, "That's the scariest reading list I've ever seen." You don't want your father, who at the time I worked for the Commerce Department, so you don't want your father, the government economist, suddenly to turn up reading all about the Great Depression. But there were a lot of similarities. It was a financial crisis. You could trace all kinds of things. Bank runs, for example.
Right.
We didn't have people lined up on the street, but there were bank runs. This is totally different. This is something we have not seen before, where we deliberately shut down entire sectors of the economy strictly to stop a disease from spreading. So this is very, very different, and it's going to show up very differently in a lot of ways, including how the recovery occurs. Because financially, while we had weaknesses financially, we didn't have a financial crash.
You mean whereas the recession, the Great Recession, you would look at as more of a crash of sorts? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
And in fact, most recessions were caused in the past by financial crises of some kind. So you could see that there was some overextension of credit to some sector, and then when the overextension was recognized, or when something happened that destroyed it, then all of a sudden people would go for cash. And you can look at milder versions of these or harsher versions of these, some of them generated by the government, like in 1982, some of them not generated by the government, but that was a typical pattern. You could go back and see them all. This is something completely different.
Right. So
Yes.
go ahead, Jim.
The same thing, I think, in New Jersey, Dan's analysis would hold. The past three recessions were all caused by excesses in the system. They were all caused by bubbles. And the problem is you never know you're in a bubble economy until it bursts.
Right.
The 89-92 recession was the office building bubble that burst. The 2001 recession, New Jersey was one of the epicenters of the high technology capital investment bubble. Remember .com went to .bomb in that period. And then in 07, 08, we had credit bubble and the housing bubble burst. So we had three bursting bubbles that really sent the state's economy into a tailspin. This is completely different.
Right.
No bubble, everything was percolating along very nicely, and then everything had to be shut down.
So let's turn now to the federal and New Jersey governments and how they have responded to the crisis and what you think they need to be doing going forward. So Danny, I'm sure this is not news to you, but United States had $17 trillion in debt at the end of 2019, which was equal to 79% of GDP, which is far greater than the average debt for the past 50 years. And I assume, and I'm not an economist, that at least another $3 to $5 trillion will be added to that by all this aid going out for coronavirus, and then also a drop in revenues for the government. So what does this huge debt portend for the long-term health of the United States economy?
Isn't it nice to talk about $1 trillion here or there?
Yeah.
So here's the thing about debt and countries issuing debt. A country can issue debt as long as people are willing to buy it. In other words, it can keep issuing debt until it can't.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to say, oh, you just didn't help me, but the key point here is that the limit on how much the U.S. can borrow is really the willingness of global investors, and a lot of them are actually in the United States, of course, to accept U.S. debt, to believe that the U.S. will repay that debt at some point. At current debt levels, we are paying extremely low interest rates, which is telling us that investors actually want more U.S. debt, not less. They like U.S. debt. So in the short run, it's not a problem. In fact, it's a very good idea if we have the power to borrow. It's a good idea for us to use that power in order to alleviate the real economic situation. That's why I'm an advocate of borrowing and giving money to states and local governments to keep the schools running and keep police and firefighters and so on in place. It makes perfect sense. And by the way, the federal government is borrowing, but right now the private sector is saving more. So there is actually room on that side for the federal government to borrow more. In the long run, it does create more problems, and we certainly need to think about long-run finance. But before this started, I would show people a chart about the long-run prospects for U.S. debt. And that chart shows you that there is one cause, and only one cause, of all these scary scenarios in which in 2042 the U.S. stops being able to issue debt. And that causes healthcare. So it's healthcare that drives that long-term federal budget deficit. And it's healthcare that we are going to need one way or another to figure out how to deal with in order to solve it. And this doesn't change that. This may advance the date at which we really need to make decisions about healthcare, but this isn't enough money in and of itself to create the problem. The long run problem of US finances is still figuring out how to pay for healthcare.
Yeah, that is a big problem. So let's take a look at New Jersey, Jim. We always got to look at New Jersey, right? Lawmakers in New Jersey are talking about a $10 billion shortfall for the rest of this fiscal year and the next one. And Governor Murphy has proposed bonding $10 billion or more to cover this. And I know Senator Sweeney not happy about it, and I think the Assembly is going to go along with it. But can you tell us how this bonding proposal would work, or what are the mechanics of it?
No, I really can't. I don't have enough information on it, but the states are really constrained on what they can do. They all have to have a balanced budget, by the state constitution. There are strictures that I think the Supreme Court will uphold, that major bond issues have to have voter approval. And the like. We do have a funny situation, about 18, 19 years ago, where we did borrow and the Supreme Court had a muddled decision on it. And usually if there's a real problem, June 30th, 11:59, they stopped the clock in Trenton because July
Why not?
we have to have the balanced budget in force. And, maybe that'll go on for months this year. We'll be stuck at 11:59 and the like. But the question, what's dangerous in my mind is using long-term bonds for current operating costs. Bonding in debt makes a lot of sense for infrastructure that has a 25, 30-year life, where you're spreading the costs, over the users of that infrastructure and the like. But if it's going to be used just to plug up short-term holes, that's another issue. And I don't know whether they're planning, whether these would be 2-year bonds, 3-year bonds. I don't know what the terms are on them, and I'm sure it may well be a work in progress. But it all depends whether the federal government will step in and provide some of that bridge financing or interim financing to get us through the deepest part of the crisis.
Right. Yeah, they don't have, my understanding is that what kind of terms, how many years is still being debated. And I know the concern of some is that if they do bond this 10 billion and then the federal government says, here's 2 billion, well, then they'll just spend the whole thing. But that's a topic for another day. So we're just about out of time, but I want to end with my benevolent dictator question. It's one of my favorite questions. If you were a benevolent dictator and had complete control of the reins of government, and you could do whatever you wanted, what would you do from a governmental perspective to help the economy? And let's look at New Jersey first. Jim, what would you do with these unlimited king-like powers?
Well, I'd look at investments, and again, this is hard to do, investments in the industries of the future. New Jersey has a rich heritage of being a technological leader, going from Thomas Edison to the invention of the transistor in Murray Hill at Bell Labs, to the invention of solar power at an Exxon Mobil research facility and the like, and all the pharmaceutical research that used to take place in New Jersey and the like. And that served us very well for many years. We've been stumbling in those sectors. In terms of I have a vested interest in higher education, so I would think research in higher education would be a worthy area. But clearly, sectors that promise the nation to be a leader in a number of fields should be invested in. We shouldn't be investing in the industries of the past. So again, I would be forward-looking. I would try to see where New Jersey fits in within the national technological race, where the nation fits in the global technological race, and make sure that New Jersey's a player.
Great. Danny, now I'm going to hand over those powers to you.
Yeah, I'm going to use them a little differently and take the question to a different place. To my mind, the key thing that we need to do in order to have a successful recovery is establish trust. Everyone in the economy needs to have trust, on a variety of metrics and variety of ways. Trust in other people, trust in their health, trust in finances. Establishing that trust is what will get us a really good recovery. Some of my Deloitte colleagues have written a bit on this. And I think that if I were a benevolent dictator, I would, of course, want to establish trust in government so that government can do things and can say things and people will follow it. And if I were a benevolent dictator of a company, or even someone just interested in being successful, I would think about establishing trust in all my stakeholders, customers, employees, investors, everyone, because I think that it is organizations that establish trust that are the ones that will come out of this successful.
Great, great. Well, this has been, as I knew it would be, really fascinating. I know that I've finally received some answers to questions that I've been asking for many, many weeks. Unfortunately, we are out of time now, but thank you so much for joining us today, Danny and Jim. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next edition of Issues Watch Live will be on July 8th with replays on July 13th and 17th. For that edition, we'll have Senator Steve Oraho and New Jersey Spotlight budget reporter John Reitmeyer, and they'll be discussing the fiscal outlook for New Jersey. We'll talk about the state of the state's budget, and we'll talk about how it's going with the reopening of businesses in the state, the prospects for additional aid from Washington, and the impact of all of this on the public worker pension fund. And be sure to check NJCPA.org, NJCPA Pulse, the Open Forum, and our Issues Watch podcast for updates on coronavirus-related issues and more. And thank you so much for watching.